And welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Matt Del Vecchio, specializing in home care, elder care planning, and the senior living industry. Thank you for tuning in today on a nice Sunday. Some parts of it were nice, at least. Well, over the years, and especially since the pandemic, there's been an increased awareness about mental health. We just heard from Ella Amir from AMI Quebec, and there's been significant progress made in the field. Well, one organization that has been far ahead of its time is the Douglas Institute, which is based right here in Montreal. It's a leading, internationally recognized institution on the cutting edge of brain science that provides needed services to those with mental health issues for our most vulnerable. Well, I'm very happy to have in studio with me Laura Fish. She's the president and chief executive officer of the Douglas Foundation. Laura, welcome to Life Unrehearsed.
Thanks, Matt. Pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you for being here, Laura. So glad you're here. You really do amazing work, and we want to hear a lot more about the Douglas Foundation and how it has grown over the years. First of all, can you help us distinguish between the Douglas Foundation and the Douglas Institute?
Absolutely. So, the Douglas Institute refers to the research center and the Douglas Hospital. Institute is used to explain that it has an academic mission as well as a patient care mission. And at the foundation, it's our role to make sure that all of those experts working on the front line, whether it's our researchers, our doctors, our nurses, any other clinicians, have the resources they need to find better answers. So at the foundation, we have the easy job. We just need to come up with the money. And then we have experts who can help us find answers.
You are being very humble because it is a very challenging job that you and your team have to do with so many foundations and good causes like yours out there. Now, I love your story here, Laura. This is very personal to you and how you got involved in the Douglas Foundation. I'd like to hear about it.
Sure. So, Matt, you and I have known each other for a while. You know this story, but many of your listeners will not. Mental health and Alzheimer's in particular are very, very personal issues for me. My late mother, Judy, died of Alzheimer's several years ago. My grandmother, Frida, died of Alzheimer's, and my Auntie Javi died of Alzheimer's this year. So what I often say to our researchers is, I'm in a rush. I need more answers, better prevention, and I need it quickly. And I'll just add, a funny thing happened. When I took the job at the Douglas, I was attracted to it because of my mom. But when I stopped to think, I realized that I have been touched by mental illness in so many different ways over the course of my life. And it's very much something that's happening in my own circle and not at the neighbors or across the street. When we say 1 in 3 Canadians, that really resonates with me.
Yeah, and when you, just like you're saying, if it's not yourselves, it's just a quick conversation with someone over a coffee and it is being affected. Because mental illness is such a broad term,
Absolutely.
right? And you just mentioned Alzheimer's and your mom and your family history. That's just one very, very small part of mental health, a very important one that Douglas is leading the way. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I want to address, Ella Amir just prior was talking about the stigma
Yep.
related to mental health. And, it's so much more than what the Douglas can do. You think of, the Douglas, it's just people with really heavy duty mental health issues, but it's much more than that. Can you tell us about some of the different array of services offered by the Douglas?
Sure. I'm going to start by telling you what makes the Douglas unique. First of all, we are the only bilingual psychiatric hospital here in Quebec, and we're the second largest psychiatric research center in Canada. And so it's not only about the services for us, it's about using research to elevate the services, as it were. And we do treat patients from a young age. Sometimes our youngest patient would be around 8 years old. And people come to us all through their lives. So our specialties include pediatric psychiatry, mood disorders, psychosis, eating disorders, geriatric psychiatry, etc.
Talking with Laura Fish, President and CEO of the Douglas Foundation, here on Life Unrehearsed. Laura, you talked about some of these services. We're going to address some of the research that's doing on the second half of today's interview, but some of the services that are offered. Explain to our listeners some examples of services that are offered at the
Sure.
Douglas.
I'm going to use two examples. One, our eating disorders continuum, and the second is our first episode psychosis program. Now, I'm choosing PEP, first episode psychosis, because that's a perfect Douglas example. It's built on research and it's a service. And we see patients who have had their first episode of psychosis, we see them quickly. That's the methodology. The undertaking is to see people within 72 hours. They will get a phone call from a triage nurse or other clinician to assess what's needed. And if they're the appropriate candidate, then they will be treated at the Douglas in a multi-week intensive program. And then, of course, our eating disorders continuum. At the Douglas, we have the mandate for people to see people suffering from eating disorders from across the province. So a big part of what we do is treat patients who have perhaps been already been seen by their family doctor, their pediatrician, and then they've been referred eventually to the Douglas for the super specialized care at our eating disorders clinic. And that might include hospitalization, very rarely. It might include a day treatment program. It may include just an evening program, or it might include coming to see a doctor, the same way you might go see a doctor to have him listen to your heart and see how that's doing.
It's interesting because, Douglas is part of the public healthcare system. We hear about long waiting lists, and it can be very challenging. Once you're in, you're getting amazing services. So to obtain some services by the Douglas, is it traditionally through your GP or your doctor, or can you call the Douglas direct? How does it work to get some services?
So it really varies is the short answer. People come to us through their primary care physician, through their psychiatrist or psychologist, by referral from the CLSC. Sometimes they present on their own, again, depending on the clinic. And I just want to, it's really not my area of expertise, but the wait lists are something that we live with. And it's all part of finding better answers, because when we have better answers, we can treat people more efficiently and we can treat more people, whether that's by using innovative therapies, by leveraging technology, by better understanding the disease. These are all things that we're looking at the Douglas.
Talking with Laura Fish, President and CEO of the Douglas Foundation. I want to switch gears a little bit to research. It is amazing. If you go through your website, I think I counted just on Alzheimer's and other mental, over 60 researchers just on your website. You are at the leading edge, and we should be very proud. We're right here in Montreal, Douglas Foundation, and leading edge worldwide. Can you tell us a little bit about the research being done at the Douglas?
With great pleasure. So we really believe that it's through research that we are building hope for people who are suffering now and people who will suffer. And because we have such extensive expertise, we do have over 60 researchers working on different types of research, whether it's basic research, research using new technologies like virtual reality, artificial intelligence, or clinical research where it's trying new types of therapies with patients or inpatient groups. All that is happening at the Douglas. And the goal is to use research to find better answers for patients and improve treatment quickly.
Love it. And a ton of resources being spent on necessary research for all of mental illness. Now, we have to head up to traffic, Laura, but when we come back, I had no idea that the Douglas Institute actually has a brain bank. In fact, it's one of the largest brain banks in all of North America. We're going to hear all about that. And that is indeed your brain. Welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. Matt Del Vecchio here, and we're talking about the brain with Laura Fish. Laura's the president and CEO of the Douglas Foundation. And just before traffic, I mentioned that there is a place that stores brains, and it's called the Douglas Brain Bank. I had no idea about this. Laura, can you tell us more?
Sure. First, let me explain to your listeners why we need a brain bank. So, in order to better understand illnesses of the brain, whether it's mental illness, pure mental illness, or Alzheimer's, you need to understand how the brain works. And unlike a liver or a kidney, you can't scope a live human brain. And it's a really essential resource for scientists here in Montreal, as well as across, actually internationally, I would say, to be able to take a look at post-mortem human brains. And at the Douglas, we have one of the oldest and certainly the largest collection of post-mortem human brains. We have between 3,500 and 4,000 human brains kept in freezers at the Douglas, special freezers, and those are used to support research, as I said, here in Montreal, but we get requests for microscopic portions of these brains from scientists across the globe.
And they would put in this request to the brain bank, over 3,500 brains, amazing. And from what I understand, in terms of, it has to be a quality sample if you're giving this microscope.
Exactly.
And there is just something about what you're doing to preserve the brain in a great state. And so organizations around the world are requesting samples from the brain bank.
Exactly. And we specialize in brains for which we know the history. So brains that of people who have suffered from Alzheimer's, brains of people who have died by suicide, as well as control brains, people who have died of natural causes as well.
Yeah, and you could see how that research would be so valuable, knowing the history of that individual. The Douglas Institute, we're not talking about a few hundred outpatients per year. How many outpatients per year at the Douglas Institute?
At the Douglas, we see between 15 and 20,000 patients a year, and that includes only 270 approximately hospital beds. So most of our patients come in, maybe they're doing a program, as I mentioned earlier in the show, a day treatment program, several weeks, intensive therapy, but maybe they're coming in to see their psychiatrist the same way they'd be going in to see their cardiologist.
Very interesting. And talking with Laura Fish, President and CEO of the Douglas Foundation. And Laura, you were talking and addressing about some of these wonderful services provided by the Douglas Institute. You've grown the foundation to new heights, very encouraging. And at the end of the day, it's about helping people, patients. And I think you have a nice, what we call a grateful patient story. Can you share with us?
Sure. So raising funds for mental illness is unlike raising funds for other illnesses, in my experience, because people tend not to have a moment where they get cured. However, with proper treatment and support, many patients can get better and live their fullest life. And the uplifting or happy stories that we have are all about patients who have been treated at the Douglas and who have turned around and done something for future patients. We have one woman who's been a long-time patient of the Douglas, and each year she gathers her friends and family and she does a supper event where she tells her story. And this is somebody who has struggled with mental illness in the darkest way, quite frankly, and who has recovered. And she has been able to go on, go forward, and give back. And that's really extraordinary because this woman comes back every year, marks her progress, shares her story, as I mentioned, and raises money. And she's raised quite a bit of money for us over the years.
And you talk about, and I love that story too. It's giving back, and I like your analogy. I guess I can give an example of cancer where you may be fully cured and fully in full remission with mental illness. Could be lifelong, but you're giving a story of where services are being appreciated and giving back to society. And you mentioned about raising money. I had no idea, but the Douglas Foundation is 100% philanthropic. Is that correct?
Correct. We don't receive any government funding. So all the money that we raise, which goes to support both research and care at the Douglas, is money that we've raised from donors, like your listeners, from donors who maybe have a foundation, or we also work a lot with corporate partners.
Right. So maybe give some examples. I know you're doing some fundraising throughout the year. What are some of the events that are going on this year?
Sure. Well, we have our first ever comedy show coming up, the Douglas Show, which is set up to appeal to a Francophone audience, taking advantage of some of our local talent. We're super excited about that, and that's next Thursday. The details are on our website. And then we have an annual cocktail great party, actually, to celebrate all that is good about the Douglas. And that's a party called Open Minds. That's at the end of March. Again, details on our website. And then a little bit further down the line in May, we have a bingo event. My favorite, very casual bingo event, which is a lot of fun. Our goal is always to raise money, but take the occasion to break the stigma of mental illness. And we try and do things a little bit differently for that reason.
I love that. And I wish you all the best in these fundraisers. So important. You've every year you're starting over, and it's going to so many good causes. And we talk about good causes, Laura, and we're talking with Laura Fish, President and CEO of the Douglas Foundation here on Life Unrehearsed. Laura, mental illness, such a broad subject. Sometimes people correlate it with maybe eating disorder like we talked about, maybe mental illness, struggling. We've talked about death by suicide, but Alzheimer's, and for our listeners that know Life Unrehearsed, we're dealing with a lot of older adults, and part of my world and my life, always dealing with the sandwich generation. And it's nice to see that there's a lot of work and research being done to help. There is no cure for Alzheimer's. There's a ton of research being done. Can you address maybe some of the things that are being done on the Alzheimer's side of things at the Douglas?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, we do not yet have a cure for Alzheimer's, but we do know that prevention works. And a number of our researchers are currently focused on what type of prevention works. What can we do about diet? What can we do with exercise? Do crosswords really work? These are things that your listeners will be very familiar with. And we are also looking at, does sleep impact brain health? I mentioned nutrition, the microbiome. And what we're also doing is getting involved with more clinical trials so that when medications are available, we can better understand them and help make sure that we find better answers, I guess. It sounds trite, but that's really what's
true.
needed.
Pharma and medicine are a big part of not necessarily the cure, but helping out
Exactly.
Mental illness in general, not specifically to Alzheimer's as well, but pharma is a huge part of it, and the researchers do a lot of work related to that. Laura, we're already out of time. I want to thank you so much for coming in. As we just said, this is very philanthropic. You need fundraisers. If people want to donate to the foundation, what do they have to do?
Thanks, Matt. It's fondationdouglas.qc.ca. If you just Google Douglas Foundation Montreal, our website will come right up. You can make a gift. You can volunteer. Definitely follow us on social media. Check out our Facebook page, our Instagram. We're very excited about everything that's going on.
That's great. And by the way, fantastic website, tons of information for the public, and fantastic job to you and your team on that. Thanks you, Laura.
So much.
All right, that's Laura Fish, President and CEO of the Douglas Foundation. Next week on Life Unrehearsed, where it's helping the sandwich generation get in sync with their aging parents, we're going to hear from the Mayor of Westmount about the importance of healthcare workers. Thank you for tuning in to Life Unrehearsed. As a reminder, for all your inquiries or assistance with life transitions, elder care planning, and the senior living industry, it'd be my pleasure to help. You can find out more if you look up Lianas Senior Transition Support. That's Lianas, Lianas, Senior Transition Support. Many thanks to Dimitra Kritsi-Mattis. I still will get this wrong. Dimitra, you did a fantastic job helping out producing the show. And of course, Dario De Felice working the board and many other things within helping here on putting together Life Unrehearsed every week. So you can listen to Life Unrehearsed here on CJD 800 every Sunday at 4 p.m.